The Biden administration warned Israel over the weekend that a failure to allow the delivery of humanitarian aid within 30 days to Gaza could trigger a cutoff in military aid. This is the sharpest warning from Washington to its closest ally. The sharply worded warning was sent on Sunday in a letter that was signed by Defense Secretary Lloyd J and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. It was addressed to Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and its Minister for Strategic Affairs Dermer. Interestingly, this letter was not signed by President Biden and directed to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They are the two principals in this ongoing war saga. The decision not to put the letter in Joe Biden's name may provide some level of insulation for Vice President Kamala Harris, who also happens to be the Democratic nominee for president. She's been forced to walk a fine line, declining to issue any threats to Israel. Even at the same time, she has urged that the war must end quickly. She has said that Israel has a right to defend itself, but how it does so matters. The written warning comes just 3 weeks before the US presidential election. Some progressives in the Democratic Party say that both Biden and Harris should be pressing Israel much harder to prevent civilian deaths in Gaza. So on Crux Decode, what does this warning actually mean? Can the United States actually cut off military aid to its closest ally in the Middle East, and that too in the middle of an ongoing war when Israel is fighting on multiple fronts? Has this happened before? What is the legal framework if the US needs to cut off military aid and make good on this warning? And most importantly, can such a decision, which will inevitably have huge domestic political blowback, can this decision be taken 3 weeks before an all-important presidential election? The letter was publicly leaked on Tuesday this week, a day after Kamala Harris said in a social media post that Israel must do more to allow aid into Gaza. Harris, incidentally, on that same day campaigned in Michigan, which is a crucial battleground state with a large population of Arab American voters. By some estimates, there are as many as 300,000 Arab Americans, many of whom are furious at how the Biden-Harris administration has handled Israel's offensive in Gaza. She, in fact, has campaigned in Michigan 3 times this week, showing just how nervous her campaign is about this key battleground state. Currently, Kamala Harris leads in Michigan by a razor-thin 1 percentage point, which is too close for comfort. It is a state that is a must-win for her campaign. Interestingly, the letter gives Israel a deadline of 30 days. Now, that's an interesting timing because the deadline would be well after the US elections. That would mean that Benjamin Netanyahu can then wait until it is clear whether he's going to be dealing with Kamala Harris or with Donald Trump as the next president of the United States for the next 4 years. It gives him that window of opportunity. Meanwhile, United Nations officials have been warning in recent weeks that conditions in Gaza are deteriorating further, particularly in the northern part of Gaza. In the last few days, Israel's military has focused its operations, doubled down in northern Gaza against what it calls Hamas's holdouts in that area. Aid shipments into Gaza in the month of September reached their lowest level at any time since the Hamas attacks against Israel happened over a year ago. Now, while the letter does not specifically say what the penalty is, it has clearly raised the possibility of suspending military aid from America to Israel. It invokes a US law which bars military assistance to any country that is found to be blocking the delivery of US-provided humanitarian aid. The US law, which allows military aid to be cut off if the recipient country is not cooperating in humanitarian assistance, is called Section 620I of the US Foreign Assistance Act. This provision prohibits military assistance to any country that restricts or impedes the transport or delivery of American humanitarian assistance. The law was created in response to humanitarian concerns in the 1990s, particularly regarding Turkey's embargo on Armenia. It has been threatened to be used in Saudi Arabia for its actions against Yemen recently, but rarely ever has it actually led to the enforcement of military aid suspension. In fact, the only notable instance when Section 620I was applied occurred during President Bill Clinton's administration back in the 1990s concerning this incident which involved Turkey closing off its borders with Armenia. Given that Israel is America's biggest ally in the Middle East, it is highly unlikely that Section 620I will be invoked. Since the onset of the Gaza war on the 7th of October 2023, the United States has provided at least $17 billion in military aid to Israel. This figure includes various forms of military assistance, whether it's financing, arms sales, and approximately $4.5 billion drawn from U.S. military stockpiles. This amount reflects the highest level of annual military assistance ever provided to Israel in the context of an ongoing conflict. The aid has been utilized for purchasing ammunition, also replenishing defense systems like the Iron Dome and David Sling. This military aid primarily includes heavy-duty ammunition that's been provided by America to Israel. Since the start of the war, America has provided more than 50,000 155mm artillery shells, over 15,000 bombs, and that includes more than 5,000 unguided Mk-82 bombs, about 1,000 small-diameter GBU-39 bombs, almost 3,000 JDAMs, which are joint direct attack munitions, and almost 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs, which have also been included in these shipments. Cutting military aid would likely lead to a severe strain in the historically strong relationship between the United States and Israel. Israel views U.S. military assistance as crucial for its national security. Any reduction in this military support could be perceived by Tel Aviv as a betrayal or an abandonment by its closest ally. Military aid from the US is also vital for Israel's defense infrastructure, which includes missile defense systems like the Iron Dome. A reduction in military aid could weaken Israel's military capabilities. It could make it much more vulnerable to threats from regional adversaries. A significant change in American support for Israel could also embolden other regional powers like Iran, or even non-state actors like Hezbollah and Hamas, and that could potentially alter the balance of power in the Middle East, and that is something that America can ill afford to do to its closest ally in that region. Whether it is Iran or Iran-backed proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas, they could also perceive this as an opportunity to get more aggressive with Israel, for retribution for what they see as sins committed by Israel, not least in the last year since the war in Gaza began. Within the United States too, cutting off military aid could lead to a severe political backlash. Pro-Israel advocacy groups, the all-powerful Jewish lobby, and some Jewish lawmakers too could oppose such a move, arguing that it undermines U.S. security interests in the region. More importantly, this is something that no candidate who's running to be U.S. president, neither Republican nor Democrat, can afford to do, and that too this close to the election. That sort of explains why Kamala Harris's fingerprints are far away from this letter that was signed not by Biden, but by his Defense Secretary and by his Secretary of State. But at the same time, it also sends out a clear signal to Arab American voters in key swing states like Michigan.